Hey, good morning. Thank you all for coming. The bios of each of the panelists are in the program, so I don't want to delay and waste any time introducing them, so we'll get right into the content. 24 years ago, when I was in graduate school, I took a course called Managing Diversity. 6 people were in it. No one really knew what the content was about. We were trying to figure out, does the changing demography mean anything from a business perspective? And all these years later, we still struggle with many of the same issues that I think I heard for the first time all those years ago. And it's curious that while demography has changed and the business landscape has changed, and so many efforts occur throughout corporate America to try and address this problem, that we would still find it so vexing today. So we've assembled a panel that brings a diverse perspective from diverse industries to talk about these issues and really understand somehow something's not working. I think the initial intent would have put this initiative inside HR as a social construct, as the right thing to do without having a business rationale for it. But the demands of today's marketplace are far different and actually require you to respond. So in many ways, despite all of these initiatives, we are still playing catch up, and the purpose of today's conversation is going to be how do we expedite that flow. So I want to start with you, Pamela, because you have the very interesting role of oversight of HR, where this might have historically been resident, as well as running a business that is looking at the changing and emerging wealth demography across the country. So can you tell us a little bit about how does Credit Suisse view this as an issue, and how are you responding to it?
Well, thanks. Thank you for inviting me to join this conversation. I think it's a very important one. So what we've done at Credit Suisse only within the last 4 months is to launch a new business unit within our private bank called New Markets. And it's specifically focused on 3 segments that we think have been underserved historically, certainly by us and perhaps by all big global banks, but women, African Americans, and members of the LGBT community. And the business theory of the case is that if we can understand the needs of subsegments within each of these groups, we will come up with new products and services that will actually grow our business. But if we do it really properly, we will also generate more wealth creation in these communities. So we think we can actually do something that's really helpful for us as a bank, but candidly can also shine more of a light on the economic upside that's already resident in each of these communities and help unlock that potential.
Mm-hmm. Right. So Alexandra, let's turn to you, because I've actually, through my career, spent a good deal of time trying to move women into senior management roles. Often, per Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In, last year, I would agree that they don't sit at the table. And if I could take one thought away from that book, that would be it, is to just show up and be present. And I know that you are viewed as a mentor in many ways and do some mentorship work. Can you tell us what do you think is the most relevant piece of advice that you give women as they call you to ask for yours?
Well, it is interesting because I do get contacted by a lot of young women on Wall Street who want advice from me, and it's very hard for me to say no when somebody emails me or calls me. And in some ways I feel like I'm not qualified because my whole career has been in my family business or now my own business, but at the same time, hopefully I have some information that I can share with them. And I think actually just going back to what you said, it is making sure that you show up. A woman who is a consultant at Ernst & Young told me that she had invited a group of senior women to the Ernst & Young Big Entrepreneur of the Year conference, which is also full of all sorts of big contacts that you want to be in front of. And she invited some senior men as well. All of the men went, and all of the women came up, myself included, with an excuse of why we couldn't be there. Mm-hmm. So we need to understand that at a very young age, that we have to be there at every possible moment, because there are opportunities that might not be there if we don't be there at that exact moment. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the most important things I can say to somebody. I would say it to my 17-year-old daughter right now. Mm-hmm.
So I want to contrast that, because I find some 40 years on into the women's movement, we're still in somewhat of a circular conversation around that. And I want to go to the LGBT community and the speed with which change is occurring there, and all of the catalytic movements that have occurred. How, Richard, turning to you, how has the business community been involved in expediting all of that change for gay rights?
Well, I think it's amazing the hugely significant role American business especially has played in advancing the cause of LGBT rights, especially gay rights, and especially early on. They have, American business has not only been an ally, but has been a very important advocate for us at very key moments. And I think, I think the truth is that we see some of that in other examples. You kind of started the conversation by saying we're still having this conversation, and maybe the conversation will go on forever. But I do think that business has historically also played a good role in advancing the cause of African American civil rights and other civil rights arenas, especially given that people show leadership examples. Many of the people on this panel included, right? So, but American business has played an important role in the legal cases. Most of the progress we've seen on gay rights recently has been coming out of the courtroom, and there's been significant business participation. The briefs filed in last summer's Supreme Court cases by American business played a very crucial role. The policies that the Fortune 500 have followed have often been way out in front of the policies that we see out of the state and local governments. And individually, especially in the financial service sector, we've seen great leadership from institutions, but also individuals who have headed institutions who have donated money, and the fight for LGBT rights has really captured the financial service community, and they have really shown up for us.
Great. So I want to turn to you, Javier. Looking at the just demography across the Latino community, if you looked at a city like Los Angeles 50 or 75 years ago versus today, you would find a very different Latino community. Absolutely. So what is everyone missing in marketing to this, and are there cohesive factors in that community that business in general are not taking advantage of?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and I really do appreciate having this conversation, because while you may have had it many years ago, it definitely is unique going on today. I guess the first comment I'll make is that there is a missing link when it comes to the U.S. Latino market, and I always find it surprising, because let's start with what I always dub the demographic imperative of seeking out business opportunities in this community. I mean, you have 54 million Latinos. Basically, 1 in every 6 Americans is Latino. Obviously not in this conference represented by that, but in the United States. And you also have a very young demographic. Basically, 1 in every 4 Americans under the age of 18 is Latino. And for the next 20 years, basically 90,000 Latinos are going to turn 18 every month, which a friend of mine put it in very stark contrast. He said basically every 30 seconds, a Latino turns 18 in the United States. So with that, you have a very vibrant, growing, young, entering their prime earning years demographic, and yet you still have this Latino paradox that mainstream business looks at this community in very generic terms that really aren't representative, which is that they're mainly undocumented, that they're mainly in lower income and lower wage jobs, and that basically we're unemployed. And that's the kind of the generic image that you see quite a bit. Now, consumer products companies, I think, understand differently, but if you take the financial services industry, I think that we're woefully underrepresented, and we're woefully, I think, under-targeted. And I think as an investment professional, if I were to tell you that there's a market in the United States that is about to enter its prime earning years, and by 2050 is going to be 30% of the population, that's probably a market that I'm going to be heavily targeted. So,
well, and you're seeing the response. I mean, Pamela, that's part of the initiative that Credit Suisse has. But let's think of this a different way. So 30, 50 years from now, I don't know if a few weeks ago in the New York Times there was an article on Iman's cosmetic company, which was surprised to me that she had one, but she has one. And apparently the color palette that was derived at the inception of this company no longer resonates with the women wearing it because their skin complexion has changed so through intermarriage over the years in just those 20 some odd years that she's been doing this. So if you follow that as a trajectory, are people going to still self-identify as Latino 30, 50 years from now? And should Pamela be thinking through what that change in demography is going to mean for her business?
Well, it's a very good question, and I think it's one that has multiple answers. We happen to be in the Spanish language media business, and it's a question that we ask ourselves when it comes to will people be consuming media going forward in Spanish, right, which is a language issue. I think what you're seeing very uniquely in the millennials, which about 3/4 of all Latinos are in that millennial, age group, is that there is still a desire to hold on to a multicultural self-identification. So whereas they see themselves first and foremost as Americans and citizens of this country, for the most part, there's still a cultural relevancy that I think maintains despite language, is what we're seeing in the media business. And I think that's a unique trait to this group as it continues to move forward that I think will resonate and will provide opportunities for mainstream business, including the financial service industries, to continue to target quote-unquote ethnic communities.
Yeah, and I do think it's noticeable that people, I think, underestimate the amount of money that is already being generated in some of these communities. So when we started looking at the launch of our new markets business, of course, the first question is there a big addressable market? And so if you just take the various surveys that are done around women, and you can define high net worth and ultra high net worth a lot of different ways, but essentially if you said women who have $1 million or more to invest, that's a $4 trillion market. Just women in the United States with $1 million or more, $4 trillion. For the LGBT community and for the African American community, the order of magnitude is between 300 and 400 billion. So again, I don't think a lot of people have necessarily focused on the fact that there's wealth in these communities in the United States, and a lot of the people actually don't have a banking relationship right now. It's interesting when you survey people and you ask them, do you have a financial advisor? If you survey women in this group, only 2/3 of them even have a financial advisor. And of the ones who have one, only about 1/3 are really happy with the person and really feel that that person is their advocate. So to your point about identification, I think there are always going to be moments when we identify with our gender, with our sexual orientation, with our racial, our ethnic heritage, and it will depend sometimes, it's situational. But I think for a lot of people, when they think about their trusted financial advisor, I think they do want to know that that person actually gets them, respects their heritage, respects what their community stands for, and is literate in their issues. So it doesn't mean they have to be from that community, but they have to be able to converse very easily and naturally with members of the community.
And that all those policies, right, and that all their policies are consistent with their values.
Exactly.
I think that's really
No, that's
important
exactly
point.
right.
That alignment is critical.
Well,
Alexandra?
major firms have been trying to market to female investors for the last 20 years. And I always say they started out with the pink and purple. That was the brochure design. And they thought, okay, well, that'll get them in. And it's evolved somewhat, but they still haven't done the right job because they still don't have enough female financial advisors. They still don't have enough training for male financial advisors to get them to understand how to deal with women. So if they've still struggled for this long over women and have barely touched the tip of the iceberg on Hispanics or African Americans or LGBT, there's just so much further that we have to go in all of these areas.
Right, and the LGBT community has made a lot of significant strides recently, but it's kind of it's very uneven because, for instance, in advertising, in consumer advertising, this year was the first year that we saw consumer brands actually targeting advertising to the gay and lesbian community, and it was so noteworthy that there were news stories generated by it, right? I mean, there would never be a news story if a consumer brand decided to aim consumer advertising at women, right? It happens all the time, right? Most advertising is directed at women, but it was so newsworthy this year when someone ran a Super Bowl ad that had a gay couple in it that it generated a news story.
Yeah, and I think actually building on both of those points, I think to Alexandra's point, authentic new products and authentic new ways of going to market are actually what is needed and what will work because we've seen it work in other industries.
But I think to Alexandra's point, when you think of that, where's the fine line between marketing to a group that you are assuming is cohesive and patronizing them?
Well, so I'll give you an
That's a
example
great
of
question,
something
actually.
that we feel really good about. We have a network within Credit Suisse called the Open Network, which is our employee network for our LGBT community members. And in their free time, 4 of the people in New York decided there should be a product that people who want to invest behind companies who are friendly to the movement and friendly to the LGBT community can invest in. And you would have thought that that product was created 20 years ago, but it did not exist. They did it literally in their free time, so we can't take any credit for having been, so wildly helpful, but they actually literally in their free time came up with this LGBT index and portfolio, which is vetted by the Human Rights Campaign. So there are 200 companies in the index, there are about 30 in the portfolio, and you as an investor can know that if you put your money in either one of those things, you're not putting your money into a company that is either actively working against your values or that's even neutral. You're putting your money behind some companies that are actually, as Sheryl Sandberg would say, leaning in to the issues that matter to you. So this is a product that was laying in plain sight, and some entrepreneurial employees created it.
Yep.
It's actually outperforming the S&P 500. It was launched last fall, so it's 50 basis points better than the S&P 500. It has a little less volatility than other indexes, so it's less volatile. It returns a bit better than the market, and you're putting your money where your mouth is.
Right.
So that's just one example of what authenticity really means,
Yeah, that's
which
right.
is to say, let's look at an actual issue, a problem that needs to be solved, and let's come up with something that's spot on. That has nothing to do with being condescending or patronizing. It just says, hey, there are a lot of people
just recognize
who
it, right?
would actually love to do this. All things being equal, how many of us wouldn't want to put our money behind the companies that stand for the values that we share? It's hard to do that sometimes. So if we can make that easier, I think that is an authentic way.
And you have to stand for something.
Yes.
So I want to, Alexandra, turn to you because I think you have a unique perspective as a woman. You took over your company at a very young age, sold it, and then bought it back. So I want you to give us, because I think people learn best from personal anecdotes, what was your experience, and I want you to view this through a gender lens, of how you were treated in each of those times, when you were 30 or 31 at the first time and then later on? Because you're only 32 now.
Right, I wish. So when I was very young and first at the company, it was very frustrating for me because I looked younger than I was, I sounded younger than I was. So I actually, for a long time, wanted to be old. Now I would like it to be the other way. When I became the head of the company, my dad was larger than life. For those of you who live in the New York area, you would know him. And I struggled with how was I going to fill his shoes. I finally realized that his shoes didn't look like my shoes, and that was sort of the big transitional moment. But I know that there were a lot of people who thought, okay, he just gave this to her because she's his daughter and she's not capable and qualified. And one of the things that I did was I surrounded myself with people that were experienced, that were smarter than I was in their given areas, and relied on them, and I still very much do that. And I think that's one of the things that makes me a successful manager. When I sold the company, it was a big wake-up call. First time, because I stayed for 4 years with the parent company, first time in my life that I did have to deal with a corporate culture and other people's opinions, and it wasn't always so nice at all. And I had a really rough time, and I was going through the things that a lot of entrepreneurs do when they sell their companies, which is massive regret, inability to recognize that you have given up control. And I really struggled with it and wished for nothing more than to get my company back. So when we were sold to Merrill Lynch, I actually wasn't able to buy the company back. All I was able to do was to buy my name back. But that was that was all good enough to start with.
Sure.
Now it's funny. I look back and realize how the lack of confidence that I had for so many of those years, and kind of chuckle because I do have so much confidence now about my ability, which is not to say that I don't make so many mistakes still all the time, but I'm so much more comfortable in who I am as a leader, as a manager, in recognizing what I've done, in looking forward to what my goals are, and to also embracing and acknowledging that I am a role model for women on Wall Street, and am extremely proud and happy to be that.
That's great. Thank you. So Javier, we've spoken a lot about kind of the cohesion of groups and how corporations are marketing to them. I also think of it from the reverse. If the largest client of the bank had called me, I would have to drop what I was doing and address that as an issue. Mm-hmm. So given how prominent the Latino community is, I mean, why aren't they demanding the kind of services that people are just first thinking about in ways to market to you?
Well, I think echoing a little bit of what Alexandra's just said, is it's about comfort, right? I mean, you have a community that there's this paradox, right? I can give you all these statistics of how large they are, how large they're going to be, $1.4 trillion of spending power. They're the 11th largest economy in the world, behind, I think it's Spain and South Korea and Indonesia. But yet we aren't engaged certainly not in the financial services industry. I read a stat somewhere that said that only 1 in 6 Latinos own any stocks or bonds or mutual funds. So we're not part of this segment. We're not part of this discussion. Now, part of it has to do with we tend to be younger, right? So as a demographic, we're younger, and we're only starting now to do things like save and invest and think about retirement. But on the other hand, there's a lack of engagement that's also coming from this industry. And the reason I say that is, to me, you talk to a lot of financial services firm and you ask them, so what's your plan to engage the Latino community? They're like, we have a Spanish website. I said, that sounds great, all right? And so what else? And so I think that there is a kind of a disconnect right now that needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed, going back to Pamela's point, in an authentic way, right? Mm-hmm. So yes, I might consume media in Spanish, but I want to understand my financial services in English. And vice versa, right? You have entrepreneurs left and right that are starting. I think Latinos start businesses at twice the rate that other entrepreneurs. So there is wealth being created, but there is yet a lack of authentic engagement to make them feel comfortable to really participate in certain sectors, and financial services is absolutely
one. So, and I really think that I think so much of it is a function of the stereotypes that exist in our society, and the cultural stereotypes. There is the stereotype about, I say it's almost jokingly, but there's a stereotype about gay people that they are more affluent than non-gay people, which, every study shows that as a discriminated against minority, that gay people are actually less affluent than your average American. Yeah. But there is this stereotype out there, and I sometimes I wonder that it's these stereotypes that are so culturally ingrained. Mm-hmm. The stereotype that Latino communities are non-documented aliens, right? Mm-hmm. Non-documented nationals, not to use aliens. So I think, one of the ways we have to battle against this, and where business can really play an important role, is helping to fight these deeply ingrained cultural stereotypes.
Well, Pamela, I just want to follow up on that. So leading the Credit Suisse private bank, so from the gay community's perspective, you have many tactical elements you can deploy, helping them navigate the different tax laws that are resulting from the marriage change.
Yeah.
And from the Latino community, though, in your New Markets initiative, are you targeting the Latino community, given what Javier said, that so few have an investable asset portfolio?
Well, so a couple of thoughts on that. The first one is we launched New Markets, as I mentioned, just a quarter ago. So we are a very young business unit in a very big global bank. We basically had to start somewhere. As a black woman, we kind of thought, well, that's 2 for 1, so let's have let's have African Americans and let's have women because we've got somebody that's living that every day. We already had some great momentum going with our LGBT community. As I mentioned, we had this new product that just launched last fall, which was one of the things that made us really understand what success is going to look like. And so Javier and I were talking about this, but if we had had a 4th segment at launch, it clearly would have been the Latino community, and I am quite sure that what will happen if this works is that there will be a 4th, a 5th, and a 6th, and we'll continue to prove the concept, and we will learn how to do this in an authentic way with a number of different communities. And clearly, from a business perspective, in the short run, it's going to feel more expensive to a lot of banks, for example, to want to do this kind of work. Because they're going to say, I need to have deep expertise, for example, in all the different state laws around marriage, adoption, surrogacy, estate planning, all of these things that a lot of our lesbian and gay colleagues are dealing with. It's a wonderful moment of opportunity, but it's also, frankly, hugely complex legal and financial issues in the community right now. So we have to invest in building that expertise. At some point, we hope we won't need it. I mean, candidly, as having grown up, I was born in the early 60s, so having seen the movements of civil rights and the freedom that women have now that might have been unimaginable, I hope this will be faster. I hope that there will be a very short window of time when people need to invest in that level of expertise for the LGBT community. But for this moment, as a bank, you've got to say, okay, I need that expertise. It's not going to be relevant for every client, but for the ones who need it, it's got to be spot on, and it changes every week. So you have to keep reinvesting in that knowledge base. But if you do that, we believe it's going to be a good business decision, and it's also going to be the right thing to do morally as well. And it's interesting, American Airlines is a great example of a company that has had a sustained effort to support the LGBT community for over 10 years. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about, why haven't people done this and why hasn't it worked, it's because it's hard and it takes sustained effort. So when they did their effort, they started doing things in terms of marketing, but then they started creating real benefits. So for example, if you went to the Admirals Club, you could bring your spouse or your partner on the same benefit package that a married heterosexual couple would have had at American Airlines. You could have done that 8 years ago, long before marriage equality was on anybody's mind, really, except in the community. They were already doing that. So it's just an example of how when you're serious about it, and it really is part of your corporate DNA, you'll just keep going deeper, finding more ways to be of service, and you'll end up having products and services that nobody else has.
And Rich, what the other thing that needs to happen that I really admire women in business for is leadership, right? I mean, when we're having these conversations, what's great is to have non-minority folks talking about it, right? When you have CEOs and the boards of directors having these discussions saying, this is important, right? That this is critical to the future of our business, whether it's because this is the consumer base, this is the wealth creators going forward, these are the job creators. That's what needs to happen. And unfortunately, the onus too often gets put on, professionals of color to have that discussion. And when you start migrating that away and it becomes everyone's discussion, that's when I think you'll really have some true progress and some real authentic conversation. And so I've seen a lot of progress within the women's movement where it becomes men talking about the need for women executives. That's when you've seen, I think, a lot of progress, and that really has to migrate itself over in terms of other communities.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the idea of mentorship, because I think this is an important issue both internally as well as externally facing. My observation over my career would be that these programs often fail because you're trying to find someone that looks just like you. So if there isn't resident inside the employee population enough senior women or people of color, then therefore they are aligned and treated as separate. So the only way it works is to really convene across these different groups and start having white men be mentors for African American women. And because what we've done is created a paradigm where Alexandra Liebenthal gets 45 emails a week of people because there's so few senior women on Wall Street that people are desperate. And internally, the cost for a corporation, the turnover cost we had at Citi of trying to retain people who would come in, but then maximize their career because they looked up the ladder and saw no one who looked like them being successful, is a lot. So I want to look at it from the HR perspective inside the organizations that you're involved in. So Alexandra, How do you attract and retain and career track women?
You know, I'm embarrassed to say that we don't have enough women. And it is a function of the number of women in our business. But I think that for the women who are there, it's about the culture and it's self-evident. I will say in the old Lebenthal, before we sold, 30% of our financial advisors were women, and that compared to about 12% for the industry at the time. So obviously, me and my grandmother, who worked until she was 93 and was very active in the company, needless to say, were a role model for other women to join. I think you have to have the type of culture where women feel like they can have flexible time, where they are appreciated, where they can advance, and yes, where they can have opportunities to be mentored by people who don't look like them. And stepping outside of my company for a moment, there's a very, very successful mentor-mentee relationship I can think of at a major bank where somebody who's vice chairman of the bank has mentored a woman who now has a major role and has shepherded this woman along in her career. And I have no doubt that she will continue to rise because of this man's mentorship of her. So it really, oftentimes, that's the best way for it to work.
I want to highlight one thing you said, and that is that by affording flexible work time, that you attract more women. And I think I would push back a little bit on that until we start viewing the issue as parenting and not gender specific, that it's not a mother issue, it's a parent issue, that we're still going to be in this loop. And so much of that is ingrained in the outreach programs that we've established. I'm going to help you because you're a woman by giving you flex time,
well,
but if you're a man and you're a parent, like, you don't.
And the truth
So-
is that flexible work time is appealing to everybody. I mean,
Of course.
even if you're not a parent. I mean, these are the new policies, the
Right.
the wave of the future. We just instituted a policy at my company, GLG, where not only is there some flexible work time, but that you don't get assigned a certain number of vacation days, right? You actually get to have you get to take vacation when you need it, when you want it, when it's good for you, when it's good for your career, when it's good for your company. We also are very focused on mentoring, and it has nothing to do with it's not based upon a connection, that is based upon a trait. I mean, all our group leaders, all our supervisors have to have a mentoring plan in place for every one of our employees, so that we know that they are being mentored, that their career goals are being addressed, and that they're having meaningful mentorship. And we also have not to pitch this, but we also have a product that is focused on getting senior executives mentorship outside of their business, so that if you're a senior executive on a leadership track in, say, for instance, the big pharma industry, you can come to us and say, I want to talk to other people at other companies who are in similar positions, and you can get that mentorship, and your company can arrange for it. And I think these programs, I mean, I'm so glad that you raised the issue of mentorship, because I think that this is crucial for any kind of leadership development, and it can really help in these areas we're talking about, where traditionally people that we're not used to seeing on leadership tracks or in C-suites can really be helped by them.
Well, two things. One is, when I think about their freedom to have flexible work time, it's along the lines of, they know that I'm leaving to go to my daughter's gymnastics routine, so there's a comfort level that they have. Now, let me address the male issue for a moment. It's not just about the company saying it's okay for men too. It's about the man feeling that comfort level.
Yeah, right.
My husband worked for a company for 11 years, run by an amazing guy who constantly said, family comes first. My husband would never, ever leave early for anything. And I would say, Jay, Mike has said family comes first, it's okay. And he just could not come to terms with that. It was amazing. So it's just so ingrained in so many men that it's not okay for them to do that too.
And it is an aberration. I remember if I were to leave work early to go to my son's ball game or something, people were thrilled. Wow, isn't that great? I thought, why is it so great?
Right.
But if a woman,
Yeah.
I would find the alternate experience. I would find that women felt they couldn't because there's a magnifying lens on their behaviors.
Well, again, in a female-led company, I think
Right,
it's
it's
different. Post 9/11, for a period of time, there were a lot of people who did take advantage of that because there was a sense, particularly in New York, that life is short and we need to take advantage of that. But I think over the years, that's diminished a great deal.
But I do think back to your point about mentorship, and I guess the new way of thinking about it is sponsorship, which is to say, if you read all the different research about what actually leads to diverse talent moving into the senior ranks of an organization, if you don't do anything else, mentorship is the one thing as an institution you've got to get right. So it can't just be the random serendipity that somebody has a powerful mentor. It has to be that somehow the organization helps make those matches happen more naturally and more often. So one of the things we've been experimenting with at Credit Suisse is a group mentoring approach, where we have 2 senior people mentoring a group of 6, in this case women. It takes some of that pressure off because, as we all know, a legitimate mentoring relationship is a very organic, natural thing. It grows up over time because there's some common interests and there's some personal chemistry and so on. But you can speed it along by actually just exposing more people to more junior talent. And you can also speed it along by helping the senior people understand how to be a mentor and helping the juniors understand how to be a protege. And both of those are learned skills. And one of the most interesting pieces of research that we saw was from Sylvia Ann Hewitt, where she said 70% of the effort in a protege-mentor relationship is being done by the protege. And that's really important for the juniors to understand, because they think all the benefits coming from the senior person to them and all they have to do is be the grateful recipient. But in fact, they've got to do 70% of the work to make that relationship really valuable for the senior person. And then in return, they get some really valuable learning and training, but it's very much a two-way street. So we're investing a lot, frankly, in just trying to teach people how to do this. It's not a natural act for a lot of people to be a coach or a mentor, but it's really, really important institutionally. So we're basically focusing a lot of our skill building on that.
And Rich, I mean, 2 points on the mentoring concept, because it's a very difficult one for me, I'll be honest. The first point is part of mentoring and part of sponsorship is to be able to look up at the CEO and at the board and saying, there is a track for someone like me here, right? And I do think that conversation does need to be addressed, that it isn't that way yet, right? A friend of mine told me that there's only 10 Latinos that are CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, right? That is a long way to go, when, especially, you know, given the number of consumer products companies and given the impact of this community. So that's part of the conversation, is to be able to say, I'm at a firm that can create a pathway for me to get to the C-suite, to get to the board. The other issue, and this is where mentorship is kind of hard for me, is, you know, I have a lot of young people come to me and say, we'd rather have a Latino or a woman mentor because we want to be able to make mistakes in front of them that don't come back to me. And I feel much more comfort. And we have to be honest about that part of the conversation, that I want to be able to ask dumb questions, per se, right? That aren't dumb, but because they're important to me, and I don't have that comfort level yet. So the stat of 70% of the work is from the protege is because they're seeking out and finding themselves. And so it's hard for me to just say the ideal would be to not have someone that is a woman or LGBT or Latino or African American, because there is something to be said for that comfort zone. And but ideally, you would like to move on. Right? You would like to have folks. I mean, some of by necessity, most of my mentors were not Latino, right? Because I wasn't in industries that had a lot of them, and I've been very grateful to that. You know, the Jewish community does an incredible job as a community of fostering and embracing through their careers, and I've been the beneficiary of that. 3 of my biggest mentors were Jewish, you know, men and women that were in this industry, and I would love to see that also permeate through other communities.
So let's flip it back around now and go externally again. So part of these initiatives tend to try to hire people just like me, to market to me. So Richard, I'm going to put you on the spot. When you think of all the professional services in which you engage, you're a physician, you're a financial advisor, well, those people, does it matter to you if the person comes from the gay community or not?
Mostly.
Or does it resonate more in certain sectors because the experiential elements are more similar?
Mostly no. Probably mostly no. But I think that I'm fortunate enough to live in a incredibly diverse and vibrant community. In New York City, and our office is in Midtown, and I live in near Washington Square, in the West Village, and so it kind of doesn't matter as much to me. But I think that in other places it would really matter to people. And but I think that also it's all about signals, right? So you don't have to be of a community or from a community to send important signals. I mean, I think that what the business community has done around LGBT rights issues is put in place policies which say, if you work here and you're LGBT, you're going to be treated fairly, and we're going to make sure of it. And we're going to show respect for the community by marketing to it. And we're going to, when in our hiring decisions, we're going to make sure that we have some, highly visible out people in senior leadership positions. And I think all those three things combined, you could hire if you saw that your bank was doing that, your individual banker would not have to be African American or Latino or a woman or gay or lesbian.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think in our experience, I mean, I speak for myself when you ask that question. So my private banker is a white man right now, which is to say
mine's a white straight guy.
yeah.
Although not that I need a private banker, but I've got one. At her bank, I might add.
Well, thanks. We like that. No, but so the point would just be, it does not mean that the person who can serve your needs necessarily has to look exactly like you. And I think it's great for us who are underrepresented minorities to say that. It'd be great if the majority culture would say that as well. That their banker doesn't have to be a white man because they're a white man. Right. That they might be open to some different experiences as well. Because at the end of the day, I actually think great bankers have great emotional intelligence. And that comes in a lot of different forms. But what you really want from your banker is you want a great deal of competence in their discipline. And then on top of that, you do want to feel that they respect you, that they understand your emotional needs and so on. And when you look at the surveys about why people are not happy with their financial advisor, it's all the soft things. It's not that they're not making them enough money. It's that they don't respect them, or they don't make them a priority, or they don't seem to really care about them. It's all these sort of emotional things that lead to this belief that this person has my interests at heart. And that's what we're trying to address.
Mm-hmm. Great. So I want to shift to more tactical elements for a moment. So Margaret Anderson is here. She leads our Faster Cures unit at the Institute in Washington, D.C. And it takes, I did not know this until I joined the Institute, but it takes about 17 years and $1 billion before a drug can be administered to a patient from discovery. So a few years ago, Margaret's team put a study out studying the early stages of the AIDS epidemic and ACT UP and similar groups who did not have 17 years to wait. So when there is a common threat, you can congeal around it quite quickly. But when I think about these issues in women in particular, 40 years on, we're still at the same percentage representation on corporate boards in the United States. And I chaired the Diversity Council. We have these sessions every year. Not that I'm getting tired of having them, but I think it would be helpful if we could come up with some tactical elements to say, what can we do collectively to expedite this process in the absence of a perceived threat? The problem is your community is enormous and not leveraging its potential power. Your community is enormous as women not leveraging its potential buying power. So like what can we do to move this forward? And I'm going to go down the line. So we'll start with Javier.
It's a very good question. I think I think people are struggling to figure it out. I mean, I think there are certainly certain companies, mainly consumer brands, that when it comes to Latinos are doing a good job because they're moving beyond what I call the language, kind of issue, and saying, let's engage authentically. Let's go to the communities. Let's be part of their cultural events. Let's be part of their educational, fabric. And so I do think from a tactical perspective, it talks about let's create a dialogue with those folks that are having spheres of influence in this community, whether it's teachers, whether it's guidance counselors, whether it's parents, to engage them in saying, you yourself and your children should be a part of what we're discussing. And I think those companies that are doing that are having the most success at this point.
Actually, just to add on to that, Diversity Magazine does a list of the top 50 companies in their magazine, and they also track how those stock prices perform, and they generally outperform the S&P 500, which is fascinating. One of the things that I really focus on a lot is companies that appreciate diversity within diversity. So they don't just say, okay, we're going to include the African American community or the Latino community. And that particularly in one of my main businesses, which is corporate and municipal and equity underwriting, that they include women-owned firms along with the rest of the group. And oftentimes, women-owned firms don't have as loud a voice. And there are certain issuers and there are certain corporations that hear it, and certain that don't, and certain that have a lot of female customers. And it amazes me that they still don't hear it. So, there have to be a lot of loud voices, and I'm one that's prepared to be pretty loud and often am, and I think that's part of what has to be a part of the landscape going forward. It can get really depressing when you look at the numbers, and at the same time, there are also some spots where I do see great progress. There are women in positions on Wall Street that wouldn't have been the case 15 years ago. There are more women now running Fortune 500 companies. I mean, Ginny Romney, poor Mary Barra. So there have been some changes, but my God, we still have so much further to go. Yeah.
Roger?
Well, it's such an interesting question, and and we have made a lot of progress, but we have a long way to go, and we'll probably talk about it next year too. I think political pressure is very important, and I think communities have to play hardball around the issues, that are important to them. And I don't like it. And I was in government. I served during the Clinton administration, and when constituency groups were particularly difficult on the Clinton administration, I hated it as a government official. But that kind of pressure gets results.
Totally.
And you cited the example of ACT UP as probably in your question, is probably the most important and most apt historical example. And ACT UP did a lot of crazy stuff. I mean, they went to the pharmaceutical companies and they threw blood, red paint, at people who were entering the building, and they went into the St. Patrick's Cathedral and protested during the masses, and there's some very famous stories about how then they would regroup after these things and they would say, oh my God, we were getting such good press, and now all of a sudden everybody's going to attack us, like the New York Times editorial board is going to come down on us from interrupting this service at St. Patrick's Cathedral. And in fact, the takeaway from that was that these people are angry and need to be taken seriously. And Larry Kramer, who one of the founders of ACT UP, said that the only way they created that energy was when people thought their lives were at stake.
Okay. Pamela?
I have to say, I think I'm more optimistic than you are, Rich, because my parents, thankfully, are still both alive and well, and they're in their mid-80s. And when I think about the changes that have happened in their lifetime and then my own, when my parents were growing up, black people and white people couldn't marry legally in most states. Now we're at a point where we see gay-lesbian marriage being validated by the Supreme Court. And I mean, this is all still in one person's lifetime. I can tell you, never in my wildest dreams did I think we would have a black president in my lifetime. I think maybe soon we'll have a woman as well. You never know.
Maybe next time.
Maybe next time. So I guess I kind of feel like extraordinary things have happened. I mean, I've been working for 25, 30 years. I think things are happening that I could never have imagined when I was in graduate school. So it's like we always want to hurry up the process of change. The point is, I guess we have all lived this. Change is hard. It takes time. And just when you're just about out of energy and resources, it changes. So just when you thought it's never going to happen, then all of a sudden it does. And you can never really point to, like, why did it turn at that exact moment? But it will turn. I have no doubt about that. I think if each of us just takes responsibility for our own corporations, our own organizations, the way we live our lives, the people we hire, the way we interact with other people, if we each tend to our own garden and we keep sharing our stories, I have no doubt that we will change.
Great. Well, I am optimistic. I just I'm impatient.
Good.
That's what I'd say.
Yes.
I think that when I first began some of the diversity initiatives at the bank, there was a lot of language in the HR manual about tolerance, and I thought, gosh, that's an odd word. Like, do people really want to be tolerated? Like,
I've never liked that word.
That confers
like
an
lactose
authority.
intolerance.
Right. So I think what's helpful is, and this is, I look at my kids who would think it's crazy not to have people of the same gender get married. There's just not even, I think generationally we're diluting old biases anyway, but I think corporate America just needs to come up to speed a little bit. So let's, we have a few moments remaining. Let me open it up for any questions from the audience.
Okay. Any questions?
Yes.
So you talk about tending your own garden. I'm curious as to how you would, how you project to take the flip side of diversity as a business rationale and promoting your own agendas and how you're doing that. We're here in LA. The Clippers are hosting a playoff game tomorrow. I'm waiting to hear an advertiser that says, I've pulled my advertising. Or I'm going to roll out an ad that we created today that focuses on diversity, something of that ilk. So how do you take the minding or tending your own garden and saying, I'm going to actually make that happen? Like, what's the flip side to that? That game's going to be sold out. Everyone's going to go. Everyone's going to advertise. Everyone is offended by it. Mm-hmm. How do you make that change happen?
So first of all, I don't know if you've heard, but State Farm did announce that they're going to pull their advertising. Great. They did that this morning. So, and I'll jump in on that. I think that first and foremost, you have to take these seminal opportunities as opportunities and not waste them, right? So this is a chance for, what I loved about what the Clippers coach Doc Rivers said was the person that was most offended wasn't just the African American players. It was also the white players on the team. And so I think what we all need to do is take these moments and say, this isn't about black or white. This is just about what's right and moral and what's not. And so from a business perspective, you have to then take the initiative and say, you know what? I think this is a chance for us to make a statement and not just pull our advertising, but to say, this is actually something we embrace. So go the opposite route and kind of make the good out of the bad, I guess.
I think Honey Maid just did that with their commercial, which has gone viral, or their response to the hate mail, which is just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's such a interesting moment, and everybody has rightfully condemned it, and I think more people will withdraw their advertising, boy. It is because the words themselves were so hateful, right? Mm-hmm. They sort of went beyond any kind of thing that you would. But it's an interesting challenge. I mean, we're talking about a sports team, but it's also a big business. So what is a team in this situation? And you're not talking about someone who's the CEO, but you're talking about someone who's the owner, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I guess there will certainly be consequences. But it's interesting because also, just several weeks ago we had the firestorm over the gentleman Brendan Eich, who was appointed and then resigned several days later as head of Mozilla, mm-hmm. the internet browser. Mm-hmm. And what he had done is he had contributed to the Proposition 8 campaign here in California, and then and after he was appointed, refused to renounce the mm-hmm. contribution, although he did say that he would uphold the company's non-discrimination policies. But it's interesting in that case because inclusiveness was such a core value of that company. It's not like he was running an oil company or anything else like that. You know, they're very their core central corporate value was inclusiveness, and his continuing was just not sustainable. But you know what this gentleman, the Clippers owner, did will have very severe business consequences.
Do you have a question?
So, thanks, Rich, for bringing up the ACT UP example. And I think that you just talked about the core values. And I wanted to kind of transition over, you know, so if you look at the ACT UP story and the history of AIDS in the United States, it was about, you know, an epidemic. It was about an infectious agent getting change to happen in the research system, in the care system, and then, you know, most prominently, people who were being discriminated against. And I think there was a sea change that slowly happened with ACT UP and people, you know, sort of saying enough is enough when everyone realized this is our, you know, this is my husband, this is my brother, this is my son. And I think if you look now, that's kind of the mindset is we're all one. Alexandra, you talked about sort of, you know, kind of the fatigue factor that sets in when you're always the one pushing. So how do you bridge the person who has to push with getting the core values of a company or a business where everyone agrees this is important, this is what we need to do? Because I think for the people who have to be the pushers, it's exhausting. And you start to get different labels, right? You know, there's words for women who are pushers and, you know, all sorts of other things.
Well, I think you rightly point out that the tone from the top of a large organization is actually the most powerful way to drive quick change. People at their heart are still fairly hierarchical, and if they know that the boss is passionate about anything, they generally adopt those passions, whether it's golfing or whether it's civil rights. So, you know, the tone that the leadership, meaning not just the CEO, but the board sets in a corporate setting, those are the things that actually do make a difference. I think with the NBA, I think the tone from the league leadership is going to actually set the tone for a lot of what happens after the fact. And I think we've got a lot of examples now where people do or say hurtful things, and there is an immediate sanction. I'm thinking about Alec Baldwin and his comments about the LGBT community and the way NBC responded and took him off the air almost immediately. And Duck Dynasty, right, where similar situation, you know, different companies do different things, but the truth is it's the leadership of the organization that has the power to drive rapid change. So the more people we can get into those senior roles who are passionate, and they don't have to be members of the community, but they do have to care passionately about these issues because change is hard. But if they do, I actually think that's the fastest accelerator.
I mean, and all these examples really demonstrate how enormously complex these issues can be for leaders of business organizations. I mean, all the examples you cited, you know, they're all each a little different, but they were enormously complex for the institution to work its way through, and some of them did better than others. Just, I think, to address your specific question, I mean, I think it can be exhausting, but I think it also can be, I mean, as someone who's been involved in civil rights and the broader civil rights sector and in gay rights, you know, for 2 or 3 decades. I mean, I think it can also be enormously rewarding, and especially if you can combine it with if you have the ability to combine it with a successful business career and make change in business, it can be enormously rewarding, right? Don't you think? I mean, and
Absolutely.
you know, so it's like,
Yeah, no, I
So
think that's
I-
right.
I mean, a lot of the work you've done has
Yeah.
been amazing.
Thank you.
It can be exhausting. The wins are exhilarating. We were the first women-owned company to be included in GE's debt syndicate. We were the first women-owned company to be in American Express. We were the first women-owned company to be in Pfizer. And when you get that phone call and it comes at 9 in the morning to your corporate capital markets guys, I mean, I jump up and down. I literally, or I get the call and I sprint across the office, and it's just there's nothing like having persevered and gotten it. And then there's another target to go after and keep struggling. So the wins do ultimately make up for all of that
And they matter.
frustration.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time.
I was going to say, did you want to answer one more question?
Do you have one more? Do you have time for one more?
Yeah, quickly. Morning, Gary Rozier from Ariel Investments in Chicago. We do a lot of work around corporate diversity at the board level through our Black Corporate Directors Conference. And where we've seen the most amount of change unequivocally is when it's tied to leadership compensation and or job responsibilities. It's very direct, but my question is certainly from a leadership or HR standpoint, what's your thoughts around that course of action?
I think it's an interesting question what we wrestle with in HR at Credit Suisse about, do you want to give people hard targets about the number of women that are in their management teams? Do you want to compensate people differently depending upon the diversity of their teams? We've had lively debates back and forth. I will tell you, based on my personal experience, I don't personally support the idea of paying people extra and or withholding some of their compensation if they don't hire a diverse talent, because I think it has a really corrosive effect on the culture, and I also think it has a corrosive effect on the talent. So I joke around with my boss, but it's like, so I'm the only woman on the executive team that reports to the CEO, and I said, if I had known that you were getting an extra $200,000 to hire me, I wouldn't have taken the job, and if I was really smart, I would have asked for $100,000 because you owe me half of it, right? so as a general rule, I don't think that it's a great idea. It's like giving blood. There's a different feeling when you give blood voluntarily to help your neighbors than if you're selling your own blood. Same act, very different emotional outcomes. So that's my personal view, and I know a lot of other people feel differently. I know in Europe there's a huge movement towards quotas on boards. We'll see how that all works out. It's a legitimate debate that I think we don't yet know what the right answer is, but that's kind of my personal take on it.
Well, great. So we are out of time. I want to thank each of you for coming and offering your perspective, and I am happy to keep this as a central focus of the Institute. It's an
And can we
interesting start
thank
for us.
you
Yeah,
for
thank
can
you
we
very
thank
much.
you for including it
Thank you.
in the discussion?